welcome everybody to this week's Crop Talk series. We'll get started here a little bit, just a few announcements to make before we get our speaker for today going. Just want to thank all the agents behind the scenes that have helped collaborate and put this on for everybody. We have myself, Craig Dinkle from the Midway District, Sandra Wick from the Post Rock District, Cody Miller from Phillips Brooks District, Keith Van Skyke from Twin Creeks District, Aaron Highland from Rollins County, Emily Bingsdorf from Thomas County, Jeannie Falk Jones from the Sunflower District, multi-county agronomist, Kelsey Wirtz with the Golden Prairie District, Lacey Norman with Walnut Creek District, and Stacy Campbell. It takes all of us to put this together and run behind the scenes. So to put together this great series for you guys. The handouts are available at northwest.kstate.edu/events, and they will also have a link there in the chat box. To ask questions, if you're not familiar with Zoom, there is a Q&A box, down at the bottom where you can ask questions throughout the presentation, or you can put them in the chat box, or if you're having technical issues, you can chat with us directly by using that feature. If you're on YouTube Live, just type your questions into the comment box, and Aaron Highland is watching that and can relay that question back to us to ask the presenter. And if you have any additional questions, you can always email jfalkjones@ksu.edu or your local extension agent. For CCA credits, if you're needing those and you have a CCA license, please email Jeannie Falk Jones at jfalkjones@ksu.edu. They'll put that in the chat box if you need that at the beginning here, and then once at the conclusion at the end, include your name and CCA number, and she'll get those submitted for you for your CCA CU credits. To introduce our speaker today, that's going to be talking about climate smart agriculture. What's the buzz? We have Dr. Peter Tomlinson. He is an assistant professor and extension specialist in the Department of Agronomy at K-State. His research focuses on environmental quality, specifically microbiology, ecology, and soil biology in agriculture systems. He also works with the K-Care program with water research and extension projects to understand and improve water quality. So thank you, Peter, for coming on and being our presenter.
Happy to be here today.
You should be able to share your screen.
All right. Well, hopefully all of the technology is working today. I'm happy to be a part of the Crop Talk again this year, and climate smart agriculture. What's all the buzz? Where, what's the background? Where are we headed? So jump right in. All right. So, in preparing this, I spent a bit of time looking back at the history. Where did the term climate smart agriculture come from? And I would say it's not so much a term as really a framework or a concept. And it was first outlined in 2010 by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. There is a large document that they prepared that looked at all of the upcoming issues facing agriculture globally, and that document discusses how we're going to meet the needs of a growing population. And out of that came this framework of climate smart agriculture. And really it goes beyond just thinking about cropland, but thinking about how we we integrate approaches across all of our managed landscapes, everything from cropland to our salt and freshwater fisheries, livestock systems, forest systems, and with that as kind of the scope, it's how across all of these systems do we address really an interwoven challenge of meeting food security needs, as well as addressing climate change driven challenges that face all of these landscapes. It's how do we deal with the short-term weather effects and the longer-term changes that have been observed in the climate. How do we make our systems more resilient or robust? And how do we at the same time minimize agricultural's footprint as a driver of some of these changes that have been observed? And so with that, there's really kind of from a producer perspective, three main goals of climate smart agriculture. Number one is to find ways to increase productivity, enhance resiliency, and reduce emissions. These would be greenhouse gas emissions. So the first poll question has popped up, so I'm just going to pause there a minute and give folks a chance to answer that. Okay. And so, within these three goals, the interesting thing is we look back at many similar. All right, so there's the responses to the poll questions. So we've got kind of a predominance there in the middle of a little to some, and then a few with no knowledge and a few with quite a bit of knowledge. So, all right, hopefully this will be useful for everybody. And so within the climate smart agricultural framework, there's no definition of new farming practices. In fact, many of the things that we're already doing from a conservation and stewardship standpoint are encompassed into the climate smart agricultural framework. This includes, for example, nutrient management. You might be asking, why does nutrient management fit into this? Well, a couple reasons. If we look at nitrogen fertilizer, for example, there is a carbon intensity score that can be calculated for the production phase of producing that nitrogen fertilizer. And that takes into account the greenhouse gas emissions that occur during the fertilizer manufacturing and transportation. So at the farm level, if we can be more efficient with the nitrogen that we're applying, and we can save on how much nitrogen we're putting out, we can already realize a reduction in emissions, as well as some economic gains by using that nitrogen fertilizer more efficiently. And so that's just one example from a nutrient management standpoint. Conservation tillage, cover crops, we can look at those, with conservation tillage. If we're saving a couple of tillage passes, we've got some reduction in fuel and tractor emissions. We concurrently can save on some soil moisture. We've got an opportunity for increased productivity. And if we're protecting that soil surface and armoring it against the erosive forces of raindrop impact and slowing down the water movement across the surface, we're keeping soil in place and enhancing the overall resiliency of our system. So, this is where, I'm excited about the concept of climate smart agriculture, because many of the things that we're already doing are captured within this framework. So why now? Couple major drivers. One, we continue to see an increase in the global population, and as countries become more affluent, we see changes in diet, we see changes in consumer food demands, and all of this adds up to an increased demand for food in general. At the same time, food production is struggling to keep up when we look at it from a global perspective. Crop yield levels globally are leveling off. We've got many stressed natural resources, soil, water, impacts on biodiversity of our systems. And so all of these challenges add up to concern about how we meet the needs today as well as the needs in the future. And in a report by World Bank, they cited in 2020 that there were 690 million people that were hungry, that we were not meeting their basic food needs. And that is projected to increase. And so, this, I think, is the real driver behind why, both here in the United States, but globally, there is this push for climate smart agriculture. And that is, applying it across a highly mechanized system like we have in the US to, a more basic, landholder approach in a third world country. And so, as we look at this a little bit deeper, agriculture has some vulnerabilities that we need to keep in the back of our mind that challenge our food production. Increased temperatures is certainly a concern. We're seeing, higher daily temperatures when we look over the last 30, 40 years. We're seeing shifts in frost freak dates. We've got weather variability where we go from too dry to plant to too wet to plant to we can get the crop in the ground, but then, we have a flash drought again, and we may not be able to bring that crop to final harvest. And so, we in the plains are used to this weather variability, but we have seen increased variability even here, but in other regions across the country and the globe where they're used to a fairly stable weather pattern, they're seeing increased variability. That shift in agro-ecosystem boundaries, we're growing corn at more northern latitudes. We're seeing those changes in frost-free dates, challenges from invasive plants and insects that we normally would not have expected to see, let's say in Kansas, that we're now having to deal with, that, maybe our neighbors to the south had already been dealing with. And so how do we adapt and adjust to those new pressures? And increased frequency of extreme events. These large, thunderstorm events, we experience those, but they're getting larger. And so this taxes some of our basic conservation infrastructure, such as terraces. And so, as we're looking at adapting to all of these challenges, do we need to increase or change the storm size that terraces are built to? Cover crops certainly play a role here too in providing more protection to that soil surface. But as we stretch beyond our row crop systems and start to think about all of these vulnerabilities across other forms of agriculture, such as aquaculture, we can see that these same vulnerabilities stretch across multiple food production systems. And one of the things that came out of the report by World Bank was that globally there needs to be a substantial investment in adaptation to both maintain and increase agricultural yields or food production. And so, we're starting to see some of those investments made in the U.S. Certainly, World Bank, from a global perspective, is making investments in more globally. And so, what are we seeing in some of our signatures? So, pulled these graphics. But we can see, certainly changes in observed U.S. temperatures, and pretty much all of these graphs. We're seeing, higher average temperatures across all of the different regions of the United States, and to highlight a couple, you can see here, Alaska is certainly getting warmer. Our northern latitudes here are all showing higher temperatures. While we look at the south and even into the southern Great Plains, we're seeing some changes, but they're more subtle in terms of the temperature changes. We're already fairly warm environment. But when we look at observed changes in U.S. precipitation, we're seeing, here, Texas, Oklahoma Panhandle, Southeast Kansas, we're seeing decreases in precipitation. We go up here into the upper Great Plains and the Midwest, we're seeing some signatures of increased precipitation. And this is on 10-year cycles. So we're not necessarily looking at the individual year data here that would, if we looked at individual years, we would certainly pick up some of the droughts that we've experienced in the last 10 years. But this is just looking over a broader time frame to start to pick up, on a decadal scale, what changes are happening. This is, I think, a very interesting slide. So this is a graph of increases in heavy precipitation. These are the heaviest 1% of events. And, we can see, in all of the US, we're seeing more of these large events, but certainly in the Great Plains and the upper Midwest, the South, the Northeast, is where we're seeing some of the largest increase in these heavy precipitation events. And this is change in frost season length. So we're adding days to the growing season. You're in the in North Dakota and you've got a longer time to grow corn, that may be a good thing. In Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, is a longer growing season a good thing or a bad thing? I think we can argue that both ways, but we need to be aware that we've got changes in our growing season, and we need to be prepared and think about how we need to adjust our management to adapt to those changes. And as we think about the major driver and causes behind climate change, we certainly have natural drivers, volcanic eruptions. We've got emissions from our natural systems, but human interactions are also driving some of these changes. We've got emissions coming from the agricultural sector, certainly not the largest, but one that gets attention. We'll talk about some of those emissions here in a little bit more detail. We've got industry, we've got transportation. Those are sectors that are producing greenhouse gases and serving as drivers of climate change. And so when we think about this in terms of an agricultural perspective, agriculture, depending on which report and how it's being aggregated, generates between 19 and 29% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. But with this also is the challenge of food loss or waste. And the World Bank report cites that about a third of global production never makes it to a hungry person. It's either lost at the farm gate, or it's wasted because of transportation issues. The list is long, but this is coupled in with climate change as one of the areas that we need to address, is how we preserve and get that food from the farm to the person that needs it. And then we have, it's not all gloom and doom. We have opportunities. We have opportunities to improve our efficiencies that lower emissions per unit of produced product. We have opportunities to sequester carbon in our soil systems. And so, we need to think about how we can take advantage or make some of these opportunities happen. So this is looking at greenhouse gas emissions by economic sector. And so what we can see here, green is this category AFOLU, which stands for agriculture, forestry, and other land uses. In this report, accounts for about 24% of the emissions. And we see that electricity and heat production is 25%, large driver. Industrial manufacturing, 21%, transportation, 14%. And so, agriculture's right up there in the big four sources of greenhouse gases. And this is in terms of the direct emissions. When we look at the indirect emissions that come into play, there's still some from agriculture, forestry, and other land uses, but it plays a smaller part there. Looking at US greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide is the big player in the United States. Nitrous oxide, which is one gas that we think about from an agricultural perspective accounts for about 7%, and this would be connected with denitrification and nitrogen fertilizer use, methane production, about 10%, and then other fluorinated gases, about 3%. And so, this agriculture, forestry, and other land use sector gets a fair bit of attention, and I've talked about this in more detail when I talk about carbon credits. But what I'll just simply highlight here is, when we look at these different agricultural sectors, agriculture has decreased their emissions from their 1960-70 levels when we look at 2000 to 2010 levels. And so, this is certainly good, and it highlights that there can be opportunities within agriculture to decrease their emissions. Groups are also looking to agriculture as perhaps there's opportunities that they can purchase through carbon credits, offsets to the greenhouse gas emissions that their processes, their manufacturing processes emit. And so this is why the agricultural sector gets attention. And so, as we transition here a little bit, I just wanted to highlight that as we think about climate smart agriculture, this is not new to Kansas, and certainly not new to research that has been going on throughout Kansas. I've titled this slide, resilient soils through conservation practices. We've had lots of work that K-State has been involved with, and adoption of conservation practices such as terraces and how we maintain those, reduced or no-till production, residue management, cover crops, the technology that goes with how to set a planter to deal with heavy residues. The spectrum of work is broad that has been done to support conservation practices that lead to resilient soils. And so I'll just highlight a few studies that I've been involved with. So there's a long-term cropping systems cover crop study. It's focused on the addition of cover crops between wheat and initially grain sorghum, now corn. Started in 2007 by Dr. Craig Rosenboom. But it's looking at after wheat harvest, what cover crop opportunities can be inserted there. There's been work done to look at, if we add a cover crop, can we reduce or retain nitrogen in that cover crop biomass that otherwise would have been subject to loss? And so this is looking at near surface soil nitrate levels. And in fact, we've been able to document that, the addition of a range of cover crops will reduce that available nitrogen at the near surface. Ostensibly, that's being retained in the cover crop residue. And with that, we can decrease the nitrous oxide emissions, and compared to a chemical fallow where we've left nitrogen, unused by the wheat crop is left in the soil system. And with that, we've got to, make sure that we're still producing and maximizing our crop production. And so we've looked at, where does the optimum nitrogen rate need to be? And then with that, we can also look at fertilizer replacement value calculation for cover crops. And so do certain cover crops present an opportunity to replace some of the nitrogen in the system? And this has been a bit hit and miss, but certainly if you can get a summer legume planted after your wheat as a cover crop, you have the potential to replace a portion of your nitrogen needs. But there are other cover crops that either have no effect or, suggest that you need to add additional nitrogen to your system, such as a summer non-legume cover crop like sorghum sudan grass. We've got the Agricultural Watershed Field Laboratory that has been in place since 2014. Focuses on improving our understanding of the addition of cover crops in the corn soybean system. We've been able to document decreases in soil erosion by having that cover crop present. And we're getting a better understanding of how water moves off a field that is in no-till, either with cover crops in the green or without cover crops in the brown. And the interesting thing is we've seen the same amount of water leave the field, but where we've added the cover crop, we're decreasing the peak height or the maximum flow that's leaving the field, and that water stays in the field for a longer period of time. And then we're also gaining some important insight around phosphorus fertilizer management and new phosphorus stratification that has if we're losing phosphorus to our freshwater systems has impacts on harmful algal blooms and fishery production downstream. Looking west, Augustino Bohr and John Holman, who spoke last week, have been doing some innovative research around flex cover cropping, trying to balance, growing a cover crop that has the potential to fix carbon, increase organic matter in our soil systems with the challenges of limited precipitation in Western Kansas. Documented some interesting results with aggregate stability increases, and looking for how do we balance the environmental challenges of Western Kansas with some of these opportunities around climate smart agricultural practices. And there's a range of other projects ongoing. There's been a partnership between the Kansas corn growers and the Soil Health Partnership. There have been a couple USDA funded projects in this sustainable agricultural ecosystems area, looking at both cover crops and how we maintain productivity in our rain-fed food systems in Kansas. And then, we can look, there's work funded by other organizations out of USDA. I've been involved in a Department of Energy funded project, and it's a smart farm project for grain sorghum. And maybe thinking Department of Energy, that's an odd funder, but this is being driven by, grains going into the ethanol, grain-based ethanol stream. Sorghum is certainly a viable grain for ethanol production, and depending on availability, can be quite competitive in the ethanol market. And Kansas, Panhandle, Oklahoma into Texas is the heart of sorghum production country. So it makes sense that a project thinking about grain sorghum is based in Western Kansas, Western Oklahoma, and the Panhandle of Texas. And So, we're looking at a broad range. This is on-farm work, looking at, what are the crop management drivers? Um, you know, what are the atmospheric drivers, the soil drivers? And so we're taking measurements in all of these areas, developing a large, high quality data set that can be used in modeling and predicting predictive tools around greenhouse gas emissions, the carbon intensity score of in this case, grain sorghum, but there's complementary projects going on across the country for soybeans and corn and rice and sugarcane. And so, an interesting area to be involved in. And most recently, was the announcement by USDA last February about this time that they were seeking proposals for what they called Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities. The goal of this request for proposals was to finance partnerships to support production and marketing of climate smart commodities. Projects that they were looking to fund had timeframes of 1 to 5 years, and they had a request for both large proposals of $5 to $100 million, and round 2 was small proposals, $250 to $5 million. And so the large proposals, there were 70 projects selected in September of 22, and in the smaller proposals, there were 71 projects selected in December of 22. I've gone through the website and identified the projects that listed Kansas as being a state that there's planned work, and there are 24 projects that identify Kansas. So this is something to be on the lookout in the next 6 to 12 months. Many of these projects are still in ongoing negotiations with USDA. The hope is that the first set of projects that'll be rolled out will be announced at the Commodity Classic event in early March. So the goals of this focus by USDA certainly fit in with the framework of climate smart agriculture. They're looking for projects that provide technical and financial assistance to producers to implement climate smart practices. And these are completely voluntary. I've been looking into projects. There will be opportunities, for incentive payments around, enhanced efficiency nitrogen fertilizer use. There will be financial assistance around planting cover crops. And so there's that getting practices onto the ground piece. But another core component of this is, each of these projects needs to propose and pilot ways to quantify and document and report the associated either carbon sequestration, which would be pulling or removal of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and storing it in the soil, or reducing, say, nitrous oxide emissions from the production from the production and the application of nitrogen fertilizer. And then with that, developing market opportunities for producers to both sell their commodity, but also to sell their either their ecosystem services or their carbon credits, and gain some financial income that way as well. The project within the 24 funded in Kansas that I'm most familiar with is one that was put together by National Sorghum Producers. And their focus was the implementation of a broad range of climate smart production practices across U.S. sorghum acres, with the goal of reducing both carbon emissions and developing markets for sorghum as a climate smart commodity. And the piece of this project that I'm directly tied to is around climate smart sorghum nitrogen fertility. And so K-State will be working with Oklahoma State, Texas A&M, and A&M Prairie View to really focus on and I'll call it modernize our nitrogen recommendations, and make sure that they reflect current, production practices. We look at many of our recommendations, they were based on a full tillage system. So looking at a range of tillage systems, looking at enhanced efficiency fertilizer products, nitrification inhibitors, urease, inhibitors, other stabilization products that, delay the availability or the breakdown of nitrogen so that it can be timed more closely when the plant starts to need that. Fertilizer application technologies, as we think about the 4 R's of nutrient management, thinking about, what is the right place, the right source, and the right time to apply these products. And then, what is the right rate when we look at the broad range of ways nitrogen fertilizer can be put out. Optimizing nitrogen fertility, from a climate smart agricultural perspective, has some real opportunities. If we're using enhanced efficiency products and we're using that nitrogen fertilizer more efficiently, I think there's opportunities to reduce the nitrogen input required, per bushel of grain produced. If we're able to do that, there's reduced fertilizer input costs that can be recognized. And concurrently, then, if we don't have as much nitrogen in the system, we're reducing that loss potential through leaching, runoff, and denitrification that results in nitrous oxide emissions productions. And so, I hope that in the last 45 minutes or so, I've given you a broader understanding of what climate smart agriculture is all about and opportunities that are on the horizon for producers here in Kansas. And I am happy to take any questions at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Like Peter said, he's happy to take any questions right now on Zoom or YouTube. You can, on Zoom, you can type those questions in the Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen. Click on the Q&A and you should have a box come up where you can type your question. And also you can do the same in YouTube if you've got any questions.
I've got the Q&A open. Had a question, what time period of change for the graphs? So I'm going to assume that was referring to the graphs that looked at temperature and precipitation. And those, the bar graphs that surrounded the broader map were by 10-year decadal increments. And then that the overall map, I believe that looked at change over the last 50 years. And there was a question about what are our global numbers and which are US. The first graph of greenhouse gas emissions values, those were the global numbers. And then the second circular diagram that I showed was for US emissions, and I did not have that broken down by sector. So do I think improved genetics can manage to keep yields going higher in this century? You know, certainly I think that you know, crop genetics plays a role in this. You know, and certainly is a piece, but I think we need to think about how those crop genetics interact with all of the other conservation opportunities that can be applied across our production systems.
Okay, any more questions coming in for Peter? Be sure you type those in the Q&A. So we still have some time for questions. Okay, we'll do a few housekeeping just in case any of you do have some questions that come in, because we do have a little bit of time. On the handouts, you all should have been emailed the handouts this morning, probably about 15 to 20 minutes before our event started. We will get those downloaded as well on the Northwest Agronomy website. So if you didn't have time to run those off, we will run those off or you can run those off for yourself. Again, my name is Sandra Wick. I'm the crop production agent with the Post Rock Extension District. We'd certainly like to thank Peter for presenting this information for us on climate smart agriculture. We ask that to help us out for future programming, we ask that you complete this very short survey. You can click on it right there. The link is in the chat, or the QR code is right there, and you can scan that. There's only about 3 or 4 questions, and it won't take you even a couple minutes to do that. So we would really appreciate if you do that. Also, while I've got your attention on here, if you notice when we were going through the video at first, we are going to be having our weed meetings out here in Northwest and North Central Kansas. However, there has been a change with our schedule due to the upcoming winter storm that's out there. So we will not be having any of the in-person meetings on Wednesday, which is tomorrow, February 15th. Instead, we will do a virtual meeting tomorrow evening from 5 to 7 p.m. If you have already registered for those events, you will get an email with the link to join us. If you haven't registered for those events, you can certainly go into the Northwest Agronomy site and register, and then you'll receive a link for virtually that will be recorded as well. And then we can post those on the Northwest site along with other county and district websites. There will be an in-person meeting on Thursday. We are canceling the Kensington meeting since it's pretty early in the morning, but we are going to be trying to hold the in-person Russell meeting, same time, same location, which would be 3 to 6 p.m. at Merity's Restaurant there in Russell. So that's a new schedule. We will have 1 virtual and 1 in person for now. Please stay tuned to the emails because we're going to be looking at possibly, we'll stay tuned to the weather on Thursday. But if it materializes different and we need to cancel the Thursday one, please pay attention to those things as well. Okay, it looks like we're ready for the next slide, Craig. Alrighty, so this completes our virtual crop talk for today. Please join us for next week, which should be on Tuesday, February 21st. We'll be talking about some alternative weed control research from Kansas. So again, noon to 1 Central Standard Time. Same location, same link. So be sure you use the same link that you've always gotten for these. But you will be sent out a link early in the morning, I believe, next Tuesday morning, and then probably about 15 to 20 minutes before the Zoom starts. So you'll have 2 opportunities in order to save that link. So do we have any questions or anything? How about YouTube? Aaron, anything on YouTube or any more people have any more questions?
No questions on YouTube at this time.
Okay. Again, please go to the website on Northwest Agronomy. This recording probably will be posted maybe next week. I don't think we've got the recording up from last week yet, but you might check later on in the week and we'll probably have the first one up. And then also check on your own extension wherever you are, extension websites, and because it may be posted there as well. Also remember, if you're not part of the agronomy e-update newsletter that comes out weekly, there was some information on there too in order to sign that up. Contact your local extension office in order to get signed up for that as well. They can give you some information on that. Alrighty, any other questions for now? Again, thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time. Okay, we will send you the email again on the updates of the weed schools again. So just watch your local extension offices for the weed schools to stay updated. But again, there will be 1 virtual and 1 in person. The virtual one will be on Wednesday evening with the in-person one late Thursday afternoon, February 16th in Russell. So again, thanks again for joining us, and we will see you next week.